Welcome everyone to the Brighteye Edtech Startup Festival. Thanks all for joining us. We've reached day 3 of 5, and it's nice to see many of you again, and brilliant to welcome some new to us the first session as well. Today we're diving into international expansion with one session earlier today, all recorded and to be shared, covering big decisions of when and where. And the other session, this one, looking at the actual execution of your move into new markets, the how. Today, we also have our first bonus session of the week, a legal Ask Me Anything with Matt Johnson from Cooley at 4 p.m. UK time this afternoon. My name is Hege, and I am Head of Community at Brighteye Ventures. That's the most active EdTech-focused VC fund in Europe, with interests spanning the sector from early years to lifelong learning and everything in between. We partner with companies across Europe in your early stages, supporting you in pre-seed, seed, and Series A rounds with both investment and thematic support, where we can be most helpful. So the inspiration for this festival came from that work. We're very proud to present some of the best experts in the industry, contributing this week with their knowledge and experience on a number of different topics relevant to building and growing your startups. We hope also there will be some helpful conversations and connections made by all of you. Please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat. In the event so far, we have decided against doing the breakouts, so let's see if we can make this a big dynamic conversation involving all of you. But here and now, let's bring on the execution of international expansion. We are made up to be joined by George Mincer from TechNation and Erica Batista from OnDeck to give us some great introductory presentations before being joined on the panel by Ahmed Hunaidi from Seneducate and Anouk Terhar from Rocketx. To guide us through the session, it's a great pleasure to introduce you all to Ash, CEO of Started and producer of Edtech Week, soon to happen in New York and digitally. I'm sure Ash will talk a bit more to you about that, but for now, I'll leave the stage to you, Ash.
I was thinking of something like this. Well, welcome everyone. I'll be your token American. Also, but I appreciate everyone joining for this stimulating discussion on international expansion. I'm going to dive right into it, but I'll mention at the start that everyone here is welcome to join us metaphysically or physically in New York for Edtech Week in just a couple of weeks. That's at edtechweek.com, and we'll be gathering about 1,000 EdTech investors, entrepreneurs, educators at the Time Center in Manhattan to really discuss the direction of the industry from a US perspective. You can also join online, and by the end of this session, I'll include some codes for you to join a little bit more cost effectively. But let's proceed with today's conversation. It's focused on international expansion, and we have a great panel with us today. I want to introduce George Windsor, who will be our first keynote, followed by Erica Batista. George, would you like to take the stage?
Thank you very much. Yeah, pleasure to be here today. Just to give you a brief introduction of me and of TechNation before kicking off into the presentation. So I'm George. I'm Data and Research Director at TechNation. And TechNation is the growth platform for tech companies and leaders. So we work with founders, we work with tech leaders within tech companies, and we work with those scaling tech companies themselves so that they can really positively transform economies, first of all, and also transform those societies in which they operate. So we have a mission really to help augment prosperity being driven by tech. We provide companies with coaching, we provide them with content, community, and these are some of the things, of course, that they need in their journey for growing and ultimately designing the future. We've worked with some amazing companies. We've worked with over 1,000 companies who have been through our growth programs, and over 3,000 companies who we've engaged with more broadly. And they include companies like Deliveroo, Improbable, Revolut, Monzo, Starling Bank, many of those big names, many of them unicorns. In fact, all of those that I've mentioned are unicorns. And we've worked with about 30% of UK unicorns, those companies valued at over $1 billion, of which there are about 130 in the UK at the moment. And I'm responsible for all things information and evidence, which we hopefully all know is sort of a core underpinning factor. If everyone could go on mute, please, it would be much appreciated. Evidence and information, of course, being a core underpinning factor for making good decisions. So I hope to, in my role as data and research director, provide that injection of robust data and help startups and scale-ups, governments and corporates all make better decisions about their growth and supporting the growth of scaling tech companies. That's the introduction out the way. And in the context of international expansion, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview, a context setter, if you like, and I'm going to take a particular UK focus based on our experience of helping UK companies expand internationally. And I'll say, first of all, we have an amazing international team headed up by my colleague, Sam Evans, and I'll refer you right now to the TechNation website, which is technation.io/international. And there are plenty of resources there, and you'll find out much more information about how we can potentially help you. Do throw some questions into the chat if you have any, and otherwise I'll repeat that again at the end of my presentation. So when we look at the UK, we can see that the ecosystem is fast growing. Scaling tech companies are breaking across regional and national boundaries, and we've seen a real high growth mode, which includes international expansion in all areas of the country over the last decade. It's been particularly acute, I think, over the last 5 years or so. And what started out as a community in London's East End, of course, there have been many companies right across the UK for many decades now, but where we really have seen a movement build up out of East London and Silicon Roundabout in the UK has now grown to a huge range of ambitious entrepreneurs right across the country. And I mentioned unicorns, I don't want to over-labor the point, but we've got these 130 unicorns across 20 different clusters in the UK that have at least $1 billion value tech company. And that's much more decentralized than many countries and many places that we see across the world. And it shows that there is a huge amount of bottom-up growth and opportunity for companies right across the UK. And how has that been generated? Well, a lot of it is by having this global mindset from birth. International expansion is, of course, a core part of many, if not most of, these UK tech companies and their growth. So the growth we've seen is massively exciting. And despite tough economic conditions over recent months, we expect to see it continue. In a report that we did earlier this year with Google for Startups called The Decade of UK Tech, we looked both backwards over the last decade and we looked forward over the next decade to try and get a sense of what that might look like. We'd expect to see tech startups and scale-ups valued at over 1.3 trillion, up from about $1 trillion this year and $53.6 billion just 10 years ago. We'd expect to see companies raising over 50 billion in venture capital investment. Maybe there's a bit more uncertainty around that given the current climate, but just 10 years ago, that was 1.9 billion. So we've seen huge increases over the last decade, where about $41 billion was raised last year. And importantly, we'd expect to see these companies employing over 5 million people, which 10 years ago looked like about 2.2 million people. So a huge contribution being made. But to remain competitive, and of course, that's what it's all about, being competitive, continuing to accelerate growth, we must look to the global stage and we must see ourselves on a global stage. And I would suggest that any startup or scale up in the audience, if you're not already, you're likely to be looking at yourselves on a truly global stage very, very soon, if not, as I say, already. And there are many reasons why scale-ups are looking to go global and startups are looking to go global from birth. Of course, you can reach more consumers, you can create global partnerships, you can prove your scalability, or you can open up your access to venture capital institutions overseas. And we've seen UK companies do that to great effect. In fact, over the first part of this year, 74% of investment raised by UK tech companies was from international investors. So the majority of investment coming from overseas into UK companies. And that's important, of course, because investment is going to be one of those fuels for your growth. So from every perspective, international expansion is incredibly important in empowering tech. And we've seen that it's empowering UK tech. but it doesn't come without its challenges. And there are some big issues. Some of the three biggest issues, in fact, that we see companies that we're working with have when it comes to international expansion is hiring talent abroad, securing new capital, and closing their first deal internationally. And historically, these obstacles, these challenges have made it hard for companies to branch out into new markets. We have a growth platform, our online platform for tech scale-ups, and we now have about 1,400 companies on that and about 1,700 users who represent those companies. And if you're interested, I can drop some links in after this. It's free to sign up. And companies on our growth platform have identified international expansion as their #1 scaling challenge. Does that make it any easier for you? No, not yet, but I'm going to come on to talk about how you can, I guess, smooth that journey. But to take another step back first, the UK's had huge global reach historically. In fact, when we conducted a report on this called Unlocking Global Tech just a couple of years ago, we found that the UK was the 5th greatest digital tech exporter in the world in 2019, and that was behind India, the United States, China, and Germany in the global rankings. And we found that the UK was in this position because there were a relatively high number of high growth exporting companies in the UK, but perhaps these companies weren't quite punching at their weight. These firms were yet to realize their full exporting potential. The UK, given its strength, could be doing a bit more, I believe. So actually, these companies have the opportunity to add an awful lot more to the UK economy. And this is why we've really been spearheading this activity around international expansion. So to get on to the so what can I do? There's an awful lot that we can do to overcome this sort of mystery that shrouds international expansion. And the most valuable thing for tech companies in that international expansion journey is getting access to networks. That allows you to understand, I guess, the challenges that people who've been there and done it have experienced. It allows you to get that sort of on the ground knowledge to make informed decisions about your go-to-market strategy. And through this peer-to-peer learning model, it really helps companies collectively and collaboratively overcome some of the shared experiences they might have if they're at a similar stage of the journey. Having networks on the ground obviously is super important as well, and that really does help with international success. And a good example of that is a network that we've recently launched in Singapore called GBX Asia. And this took a model from the Valley, GBX in the Valley, that has been established for a little while now, and it brings together British tech entrepreneurs with those investors, corporates, and other organizations on the ground to make the most of Asia Pacific. And this is through our work with the Department for International Trade and the Digital Trade Network. We can see that there have been some amazing UK companies that have gone through this, and TechNation is helping them expand into these international markets. Versed AI in Cambridge and Uello in Cardiff have done incredibly well as a result of this. And despite still being very young, they've built solutions that have been internationally expandable, if you like, from the very beginning, and they've had international clients in mind. This is another aspect, I think, that is worth taking away, ensuring that you are future-proofing a solution for international expansion and really seeing that scaling journey overseas as something that you can, to an extent, control and factor into your growth process. It can be intimidating, but with the benefits being so great, it's really important, of course, to culture that strong global ambition. So just to cap off, in the international expansion journey, and in the short time that I've been able to present on this, I'd say some of the key aspects that are incredibly important for companies, and in fact, the key aspect is having those networks, both networks that can facilitate your knowledge and information sharing, both from the place that you're moving from, but also those networks on the ground that can help you land and expand in a slightly smoother way than you might otherwise be able to. And they can help you deal, as mentioned, with those top challenges, with getting new capital from those markets, with landing your first deal, and with hiring, and hiring being one of those challenges within international expansion that is commonly cited as particularly acutely important. Once we start to get to grips, I think, with some of these challenges, of course, they vary quite dramatically, dependent on where you are looking to expand to. Many of the companies that we work with are naturally looking at the United States as one of those first destinations for their expansion. But of course, we have Asia Pacific, we have Europe, we have the world. And I think for every company, there's going to be a right solution. It's about having the right information to assess that and to make a good informed decision. And in doing that, of course, we can secure the future success, and you can secure your future success on that global stage. So I've been quite vague, quite descriptive, given a sense of context, I hope. But to find out more information and to get access to some of the services that we're able to offer as TechNation, do again go to technation.io/international, and you can find out much more about our programs, our advice, and you can get involved in that peer-to-peer network that we curate. So thanks very much for your time, and look forward to the discussion after this.
Yeah, thank you very much, George. Such interesting points you bring up about the value of networks and the problems that those networks are geared towards solving. I like the focus on Asia Pacific and the network that you built in Singapore. It's tremendous that you've made that available to entrepreneurs, and I'm sure there's an acceleration factor to early stage that you're seeing. It'll be very intriguing to find out the results of that just in a short while. I will focus on that hiring discussion for those of you who will stay on after our next speaker, Erica Batista. We'll focus on a panel discussion deciding on how to make first hires, how to decide on a budget, how to decide on where to go. As George put it, a lot of people default to the US as a location, but truly it's more decision around what is most optimal for your business model and time in your growth. So we'll discuss all of those things in just a few minutes. But in the meantime, let me welcome Erica Batista to the stage.
Thanks, Ash, and thanks, George, for that wonderful introduction. You're preaching to the choir here when you're talking about networks. So I prepared a presentation for us today. I've tried to pack as much content as I could in the next 12 to 15 minutes, so bear with me while I go through this presentation. And please, Hege, don't hesitate to tell me if I've run out of time, because there's quite a lot here. So I'm going to talk to you today about international expansion. Obviously, that's the topic of the day, and going to be sharing some lessons learned from launching OnDeck around the world. So first up about me, I'm the VP of expansion at OnDeck. I've been with the company for the past 2 years and helped us launch formally in 5 different markets. And before that, I was working at one of the earliest startup accelerators in Europe for 7 years, where I was a founding member and director. Before that, I was actually a fellow of OnDeck's 4th founder fellowship. So I was a customer before joining the team. And as I mentioned, yeah, I was a founding team and director in the family. And before that, I was a lawyer, so lots of career pivots and international moves. I forgot to mention, I'm from the Dominican Republic, been living in France for the past 10 years, and I'm now in the process of moving to the Bay Area. So very exciting time for me in terms of my own internationalization. So, international expansion, it's such a big topic. It's like where to begin. I really like this framing and hat tips to the international mastermind community. I really recommend anyone who's working in this field to go check them out. It's a private, it's a invite-only group for people who are working on international expansion, but they have some really good questions to begin kind of digging into this topic for your company. Where do I launch first is some of the questions we alluded to. Which criteria should I consider? How do I size a market? Even when you do decide where to launch, what's the right entry strategy for each market? How much do I localize? How do I define success when I enter a new market? And this is without even talking about some of the legal implications of entering a market, some maybe barriers to entry that are, outside of your control. Organizational structure is a big topic for people working on international expansion. One of the bigger challenges of international as a function within a company is working cross-functionally. How are international team setups at other companies? How many things are centralized? How many things are built locally? And there's so many more topics. Pricing strategy. How do you adapt to different markets? Hiring the right persona. We were just talking about one of the biggest challenges is like recruiting and retaining local talents in new markets. Again, centralized versus localized teams, building the playbook for other markets, how much is applicable to the next market that you launch, etc. I also, before even we get into all of that, I really like the way Jambu presents this. It's like the existential question: should I even do it? Should I even go abroad? And his advice, the rule number one of international expansion, is don't do it. And the reason is, a lot of the times, one of the pitfalls of international expansion is people or founders expanding to new markets in order to escape problems, in the sense that, you see that you're not meeting your revenue targets, you have a raise coming up, you say, let's quickly, for our Series A narrative, let's say we're launching the UK, or I've seen that happen so many times. Or, the real question or the real reason to do it is, do you have something that's worth scaling? Is your company, getting so much traction in the market and so much, such solid product market fit? Obviously, in a startup, nothing is ever 100% perfect. But if you meet that bar, if you have something worth scaling, then that's the time to jump in and do it. And Jambu, who was one of the first city launchers at Uber, first 100 employees, has been a mentor to me while I started doing this work. I've learned so much from him, and so I also encourage everyone to follow. And how could I not shout out Rice from the Brighteye Ventures team, who's on this call and has written some amazing papers and case studies on the topic as well. So today I'm going to go briefly through my experience on going on Deck internationally, and then just kind of rapid fire at you some lessons learned. Again, bear with me while I go through this, and I'm going to try to keep it, I'm going to keep it under the time. I'll just stop when I run out of time. So quickly about OnDeck, for those who don't know us, the company has been, through a few changes as any startup, but our focus has always been on founders. So OnDeck started as a series of dinners happening in person in San Francisco, which quickly the model took on and expanded all over the world. And then we kind of formalized that into a fellowship. And this is the idea is to create the perfect environment for someone who's exploring what's next, to meet a co-founder, find a startup idea, get early customers, raise funds, and find that momentum capital, or even venture capital backing that they're looking for. So that's how it started. And that's kind of what we do in the heart of our business. But something that maybe many people don't know is that OnDeck is an extremely international community. Our founder community alone is spread across 512 cities in 78 countries, and it's 40% outside of the US. This is a screenshot actually of one of our kickoff calls from one cohort, and you can really see like the distribution of the audience in any given program. So first case study of OnDeck internationally. What does it even mean to scale OnDeck, which is mostly virtual community product internationally, and how did we prioritize? So I'm going to go over a few of like how I framed this and what we prioritize for each criteria. So the first goal was making OnDeck a truly global community. So to successfully launch a market for us meant reaching critical mass. And that means just like, if you're looking for a co-founder, there needs to be other people in your market that you can meet or in your same time zone. Our goal was really to increase density in hubs around the world. And to prioritize that, we looked at organic demand. How many replications were we already getting organically? For example, I was surprised, like we were getting so many people from Canada. So, we launched Canada officially, even though a lot of people may think of it as part of like North America as a single market. No offense if there's any Canadians in the audience. And we looked at startup ecosystem size, obviously. Having OnDeck become a truly global experience. And I like to use this analogy of McDonald's, where it's like, wherever you go in the world and you go into McDonald's, you know exactly what to expect. There might be a Mac baguette or a Mac paneer or something different that's localized, but more or less you kind of get this same experience that doesn't vary from one market to another. So that was incredibly important for us, delivering an experience that felt both local through in-person events and local partnerships and local specific market-specific offerings, and also global. And so to prioritize this, honestly, like logistically, the main thing we had to look at was time zones. Our core offering was very anchored around the Silicon Valley, so Pacific time. And so the furthest we got away from that, the harder it would be for our team to actually deliver a high quality experience. So it's not that we didn't let people into our programs from those markets, but we made sure to set the right expectations into what they were going to get. And we also looked obviously at team members based locally. Our next goal, making OnDeck a truly global business. So OnDeck is a paid program. Our business model really doesn't work the same in every market. You know, income levels vary, things change, and we needed to adapt. So we leaned on partnerships and scholarship programs. And in order to determine the potential of our market, obviously we looked at, you know, venture capital industry size, or how many venture dollars were invested in any given year, and also potential partners that could help us, you know, develop new scholarship programs. Lastly, making OnDeck a truly global brand. As a customer, a lot of people join OnDeck because it's a highly curated community of founders, and there's an OnDeck credential. But that credential, it doesn't have value if no one knows it in your market. No one knows what OnDeck is. So another big focus was that, but also educating the market on our offering. At the time, there were mostly accelerators that took equity. Our program was focused on it's equity free, but you pay a fee to join, and it's highly curated. And in order to also establish that brand, we had an insanely high bar for talent when entering any market, so that first cohort that we built locally would set the tone for the brand and the bar for talent in order to, you know, establish that credential. And so I'm going to go quickly over this one, but essentially, you know, in terms of like who to hire, we built this role called the geo managers, which, contrary to businesses like Uber and other, which have like high cost intensive, very localized, very operations heavy businesses, our geo managers did not manage a P&L. So they really acted more as a top of funnel construct. So they were bringing in partners, then handing off to the partnerships team, bringing in candidates for programs, and then handing off to the admissions team. And so that was like something that was very unique to OnDeck, but I'm sure will resonate with a lot of these like online businesses that have, you know, centralized functions and then someone kind of growing the market. That really worked for us. So now into rapid fire. We have about a couple of minutes left. Going to go into this rapid fire lessons learned, and I have my email at the end for anyone who wants to follow up and ask questions. And of course, we'll discuss again during the panel. So one of the biggest lessons for me was doing things that don't scale again. So as I said before, you know, usually when you launch an international market, it's because you have solid product market fit at home, but that doesn't mean that that's going to replicate in this new market. It's actually like you need to find that again. And it felt very strange for me to be working in this company that had insane product market fit in the US, but I'm here starting from scratch in Europe and in Canada and Israel and India. And it really felt like I was working at a different company. And launching a new market will expose every flaw in your business, so be ready for that. But the great thing is that it will actually teach you things that will help you make your home market better and stronger as well. And, you know, I always say this, but product market fit is an equilibrium, not an end state. You'll get there, and then you'll actually need to find it again over and over as you get to the next phase and growing your company. Another big mistake that I see founders make is underinvesting in new markets. So internalization is not a side project. I can't say how many times I've seen that some founder, you know, in the UK saying to someone in their team, why don't you go launch France and see how it goes? And giving people the right resources and the right, you know, budgets to make this work are crucial. Especially, I would say, if you're moving from Europe to the US, in any case, your best people should be working on it. But if you're moving from a smaller market to a bigger one, that should be a founder, ideally, that's leading that international expansion. Another big learning is that when you launch an international market, the 80% of the initial work is quote unquote invisible, meaning that you're establishing the foundation, you're building a reputation, and building that first kind of local reputation through customers and local ambassadors is important. For us at OnDeck, 50% of our revenue comes from people referring other people to a program, so that was key. But I would strongly recommend to start doing PR and press relations once you have that strong foundation to back it up, and that can actually spread because you have local customers and ambassadors who are vouching for you. Different markets demand different things from your company. That's obvious. As you launch a new market, you'll notice there are differences, things that you didn't need to do at home that you'll need to do here. that's kind of, goes without saying, but that was a valuable lesson for me, that I didn't have to have like an exact playbook for replicable to every market. Obviously, you need to localize and adapt to the market needs. Big topic is don't get hung up on org structures. You need to focus on the outcomes that you want to achieve versus like optimizing for how your team is currently set up. I've seen this happen a lot too. Also, don't worry about solving for the next like 2 or 3 years. In terms of team structure, things will change. Keeping reporting structures is okay. Like if you have a local marketing person that doesn't report to your marketing team, but then you realize that they actually need to report to them, that happens all the time. That's okay. Don't worry about it. It will be fine. Most setups work. Like, for example, Airbnb famously kept a lot of their functions very centralized. Uber was extremely decentralized and the local teams were very entrepreneurial. But that just means, speed versus coordination. It's, what do you optimize for? And, also in the focusing on the short term, the people you hire to launch a market are often not the same people who will scale it, because these are more entrepreneurial profiles. It's like the 0 to 1 people, and then you need a different profile for the next stage. The most important decision, obviously, is who you hire to lead the market. I'm going to go over this one quickly because it's like so obvious that whoever is the face of your company in your market is going to be the most important thing. And again, hire for the next 12 to 18 months. And lastly, execute impatiently, but be really patient with results. New markets take time to ramp up, and there's a lot of fine tuning and figuring out things as you go. And from personal experience, it takes some time to see the results of your efforts. I would say if you hire someone to launch a new market, you really want to make that investment worthwhile. So that the instinct is to give them really aggressive targets, but actually you don't want to suffocate the market by being too aggressive from the get-go. You need to use that as a learning experience. So again, it will take some time to see your efforts, but once momentum kicks in, I promise you, well, hopefully, I hope for you, things will accelerate. So that's it for me. I hope that wasn't too much of a brain dump, but I really wanted to share everything. We're 14 minutes now, so I'm going to stop talking. Here's my email in case you want to reach out, and I'm going to pass it back to Ash for our discussion.
Erica, that was fantastic. There's a lot of gold in there that you packed in very tightly. I loved a couple of points that you made, especially the story about making your initial cohorts very strong, and that functions as a great foundation for press and PR. Translating that into any product or company present today here, it's really about having that solid foundation of partners and having a clear product market fit, which you rightly pointed out is an equilibrium, not an end state, before being able to expand into and localize in a specific international market. Certainly from my time being early employee at Techstars, we found that very true. We had to over-index and make sure that the talent in our first Edtech accelerator, 10 years ago was very strong, and that tends to be a lesson that we carried out through the programs that we've run since as well. But fantastic stuff. I want to welcome 2 more of our esteemed panelists to the stage today. I'd like to welcome Ahmed Hunaidi to introduce himself. Ahmed?
Hey, everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed those sessions. They were both phenomenal. Thank you both for having them. So I'm Ahmed. I work at Zen Educate, a UK-based marketplace connecting schools with temporary education staff. I'm leading US expansion and US growth. We've been there for 6 months now. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the lessons we've learned over these past 6 months.
You're welcome, Ahmed. I'd also like to welcome our final, but certainly not least, panelist, Anouk Tehar. Anouk, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Great insights already so far. My name is Anouk. I'm from Rocketix. At Rocketix, we help people or companies who have found product market fit to further scale and to also overcome all challenges that come along, which can be overwhelming, but with the right help and guidance and expertise, you can really scale quite fast. So that's what we do on a daily basis, and my role is head of strategy.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's our esteemed panel for today. And let me dive right in to the conversation. Again, if you stay on after the panel, which will run for about 25 to 30 minutes, there'll be some time for Q&A with the panelists as well. So let me pose this question to the group, and anyone feel free to take a swipe at it. Let's talk about that key problem that George first brought up around hiring. How do you decide to make your first hire? We know this is a key point of success and failure, but what are the characteristics you look for? What is the process you establish for making those initial hires, and how do you know that you're successful? Care to share some stories?
I can start.
Go ahead.
So we've grown quite fast over the past 2 years, and we've also opened up our first international office in Athens. And also on a daily basis, we help companies throughout Europe also to scale internationally. And I think, as mentioned also before, the reason why you want to expand is really important also to think about, like, what type of person do we need, and especially the profile behind it. Having a day one mentality also in new markets can be really valuable to really open up in new markets. So that also means that if you're looking for the right candidate to fill that position, that you really look for that entrepreneurial vibe. And of course, what we feel is really important, really embody also the core values that you have and the culture that you have built. Because if you also want to expand in another market, you need to find alignment there, and also find alignment along internally with new people on board in new markets.
Great points there, George.
Yeah, so just to add a brief point, I guess, in terms of our own experience, it's been people who have been there and done it. And I mean, we have people based out in Singapore working as part of our digital trade network activity with the Department of International Trade. And those people have previously worked for scaling tech companies who have gone out and expanded into Asia Pacific. And I think that has been incredibly valuable experience. One point that I'd make, I think, is that in talking with companies like, I think this was probably about 4 years ago, we went out to New York and we were talking with a representative from Revolut, who was out there very early in their expansion out into the States at that point. And really they had to be, and this was sort of from them, I guess, they had to be the builder, they had to be very operationally savvy. They had to know what they were doing in terms of building out their own team and hiring for the right people themselves, and building out the business, building out the relationships, negotiating a very different regulatory landscape in the context of the States. But they also had to be that spokesperson. They had to be an excellent communicator. They had to be the face of the brand out there. And I think finding that sense of alignment with the business in the United Kingdom was about very effectively communicating and ensuring constant alignment, constantly checking back, iterating, working with the amazing people who had obviously led the company to that stage in order to pursue growth in what was at that point for them sort of a market that could be 10x bigger than what they've already done. So this could be almost one of those companies that or the expansion activity that eats the original in terms of its growth. So it was really about having that operational nous, having that understanding of the market, but ultimately being an excellent communicator and knowing that I guess those ties back to the company that were being sort of reinforced on a daily basis were there for support, and that they were within and being incubated by an incredible organization, not necessarily being so entrepreneurial that they ignored where they were coming from.
Sage points, George. Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I feel like I already talked a lot, but I wanted to say, like, I agree with everything that's been said. I would add just like how I went about it in terms of like for hiring for each market. I for example went on like each ecosystem, like Israel, Canada, India, Africa, all of those. Like I just spent a month getting educated on the local ecosystem, and I talked to probably about 40 to 50 people in the span of a few weeks. I just found like everybody kept referring me to other people, so it was more like an expedition in that sense to educate myself of what's the right profile for the market and who's who. That was the first thing. The second one was like having a very clear persona in my head of who I wanted, and like very transparently, the person I was looking for was someone who should have been raising their own fund or would have already joined a fund, but they were missing the operating piece. Like that's like, I identify with that. That's why I've never kind of formally become a VC, because I really like operating and building and working alongside founders. And so that was kind of the persona. And my edge was that this is your unicorn person, because you like love investing, but also love operating. And this is a role, one of the few roles in the market that would align those two things for you. So that gave me both a clear persona and an edge to close them. And I will say also, so like people in the audience don't feel bad about it. Like it sometimes took me like 2 months to close someone, like talking to them every day, long conversations, long negotiations, like finding the right person is key. And I decided that delaying my launch in a new market for a month was better than having the wrong person to do it.
Ahmed, you're on mute.
I would say I believe I keep getting auto mute. There you go. I'll iterate that point from Eric and say, be patient. Like that first hire has such an outsized impact and influence on your chances of success that you really don't want to rush it just to like start a bit early. You end up shooting yourself in the foot in a way. And so take the time to find the right person.
Appreciate that there. Anouk. Did you have something to add?
Well, I 100% agree. I think you never should compromise, also even in the current market that you're working with. Sometimes we tend to have the speed in our mind, and then we need to have that role filled. But then over time, you also figure out that it was much better to have a little bit more patience, finding a really good candidate rather than speeding up processes.
Fantastic. Well, appreciate the points from the panel here. I think over-indexing on that entrepreneurial vibe, the tie back to core values, the experience in the right skill sets. I also think that the word of caution around getting the right person, that you feel that it is the right person in that role, and delaying any arbitrary deadlines that anyone else might set, or even you might set for yourself. Until you feel that and see some demonstrated evidence is quite easy to say, but difficult to do. So appreciate everyone for that sage advice. Let me ask maybe a separate question around talent as well. It's related. It's about setting budgets and allocating resources, right? So this is really about making key hires, but there's so much more to setting a budget and figuring out what you need to spend on a given market to initially expand. And to Erica's point, you're trying to make a plan for the short term, right? 3, 6, 9 months, not 5 years out. So I'm curious, in your experience, how you went about determining what resources you should allocate from a headcount and other resource, non-headcount perspective. What are the considerations you made? Are there different types of models or frameworks you used in trying to figure out what to spend in those initial months?
I can go ahead and start. So I think that initial phase, it's really about trying, for the founders that have especially like grown their own company in their home market, remembering what it was like in those beginning phases. I think Erica mentioned that point. You might have great product market fit. You might be doing exceptional in your home base. And you might think that new market is very similar to your home market, but you really need to go back at level 0 and reprove all of that. So I think taking into account, maybe bring back some of those memories. What are the key things you have to test? Whether it's things on the customer acquisition side, whether it's in terms of a sale, etc., and kind of map out what are some of these key hypotheses, what's the headcount and resources that you need. And as much as, yes, you need to be scrappy, you need to be careful, this is not something you can kind of put one foot in and leave one foot out. You're either all in on international expansion or you're not going to really do it. And so striking that balance of using internal resources to commit, how much of those do you need? What are the local hires? What are the rates in the market? Also, don't forget to take into account, mishires, take into account help from like localized recruiting agencies, take into account that you have a lot of legal and other fees like that. Something that took us by surprise is insurance, funnily enough. Insurance for us in the UK is a non-issue. We went to the US, and because we work with temporary staffing and temporary roles, sexual molestation insurance became a massive headache that took us 6 months to find a very niche insurance provider that could do that. And so one thing I learned a long time ago is whenever you budget or schedule something, do your best shot at it and then double that and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to really probably go with and see how that does. And then make sure to, I would say, not focus just exclusively on what the budget should be. Make sure to focus on iterating. And as you get new information and new inputs from iteration and trying to update those and reflect on how that affects, maybe your runway or affects your future plans.
I have a few thoughts on this too. So I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here. And this is more of a personal thing where I think there's two schools of thoughts. Like some people say just like hire people and then figure out what the roles are later. I am very strict with new hires. So even though geo managers had all of the resources available from within the company that they needed and the budget and everything, I actually did not give them teams, like local teams, for a while until I was sure, what is this person going to do their first 30, 90 days? What's success going to look like? What are going to be their, targets? I have a very high bar for that, but I'm saying this is more of a, I don't know if I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. Some people just bring in someone that's very 0 to 1 entrepreneurial and to their teams and they figure it out. So I think it's more what are you comfortable with, but both work, but cannot stress enough, what Ahmed was just saying. I just 100% agree with what you just said.
A quick comment, I agree on that. I think something that helped us a lot is maybe, post the pandemic, this acceptance now of virtual meetings. So we launched the US with a team that was initially actually in London, and still half our team now is London based, and the other half we started, hiring local teams. And for the first 3 to 4 months, we did everything out of London. Schedules probably shifted a bit later than maybe a normal person would want, but that's part of the startup life, and so I think that really helped us in being able to leverage local teams. And if you keep players in the London team that just shifted, focus on the US growth, prove these initial first steps, and then as Erica said, that also gives you the time to and gives you confidence to find those local teams and hire and kind of really double down there.
I agree with you on the point that sometimes you also can do it on a centralized way, at least to get a little bit of feeling on what the market nuances are, especially when you dive into conversations with potential customers. Then you also figure out what the dynamics are and what kind of questions you will get back, what might differ from your native market. So definitely agree. And I think as a company, what is most important, or what is a important factor, is really think what can we do centralized versus what should be decentralized. And that also depends on the market that you're entering. Some markets, they are really getting along with people who are not from a native market. And some markets, they don't like it. And they really want to also speak to a local person. So market research again, and really also tapping into what are the dynamics that could affect also the operating model that we want to work with, but also looking and diving into the existing customers that you already have. They also bring so much information to the table, and see how you can also expand with them and see what that brings.
I don't have a huge amount to add. I think that a lot of it has been covered, but I'd say in the context of this festival, where we're thinking about EdTech in particular, of course, EdTech can be a huge mosaic. And when we look at international markets, and there can be a wide variety of considerations, I guess, to make from a regulatory perspective, but also curricula, if you're dealing with education institutions in particular places, labor markets and the nature of those labor markets when you're looking at the labor market in these places. So I think it will really depend on where you're looking to expand to and what your model is from the place that you're looking to expand, as to what the resource profile will look like. Ultimately, if you can sell the kind of product without a huge amount of localization required, then it's likely that you're going to adopt a model of a more centralized team. If that's not the case, and you're going to demand almost a sort of a huge reconfiguration of product or service, then perhaps that's something that should be done, or if not, could be done in a local market setting. So the resource profile obviously looking very, very different on that basis. We're developing a few tools out at TechNation on the growth platform that I mentioned earlier that can help companies get a sense of that. They're not live yet, but yeah, I'd love to give you a heads up when they are.
Well, thank you for that, panelists. There's some really sage points there that can be applied to any industry, but specifically within EdTech, I like the nuance that you had, Ahmed, about something as banal as insurance being something that you didn't expect. I find that when companies are entering the US, those unexpected curveballs tend to come from the legal environment in general. COPA, FERPA, if you're selling into K-12, there are some restrictions, especially if your model is hiring outside parties. So there's this kind of interesting tie between the legal environment and who you're getting to serve your customers, right? What are the contractors, are they not? I also like the simple advice to 2x your budget and iterate. It's very true, even of fundraising. And I think that approach is a wise one. Anouk, you brought up the point around centralized versus decentralized approaches. I find that really a salient point. In the context of the US, there are specific markets, such as early childhood, that tend to be less systematized and less developed as a market, where the market is a little bit more parochial. And those markets tend to want to see kind of local talent, familiar networks, if you will, trying to break into it, right? Markets that are far more mature, like K-12 or higher ed or workforce, tend to welcome an outsider's approach if it is differentiated from their current endeavors. So some really good points there from everyone. I'll ask one more question, and then and then we're going into a Q&A. So those of you in the audience who have questions, feel free to start placing them into the chat, and I'll pick a few questions or call you up on stage with us and ask you to say that question live. So think about what you might ask these panelists. My last question to the panelists is this. How do you understand the market and the localizations that you would be necessary in a given market, right? And you may want to use a specific market as an example, the US, Asia Pacific, somewhere else where you approached. Tell us a little bit about how your understanding of the market changed. Let's talk about product, but there might be other localizations you take as well. Any stories you can share?
I can jump in. It's a couple of years ago, was prior to Rocketix. Had the chance to move to the US, but with a European product and portfolio, and see how we can open up the market in the US. And the main thing that I learned in the beginning is that if you would make a comparison between the US and Europe, it's overselling and maybe under delivering is kind of normal in the US, whereas in Europe it's vice versa. So when you come from a European company and you start entering the US market, you're very honest about the product and also the limitations. And then you also face in the beginning, and that was also some feedback that I got back, like, well, if you sort of have it in the product, then just say that you have it, because you are building it. So then it's there, right? And people in the US will already think, like, if you say that you like almost have it, then you will not have it, because they take off that layer of a little bit over promising on the product and what it can do. For me, that was a really, really kind of fun and a lesson to learn. Like, okay, maybe we should make things sometimes a little bit bigger. And it will also not also compromise on the authority that we're trying to build, or on what we've established so far. So it's sometimes also these cultural differences that you cannot foresee in the beginning, because it's so embedded in much more like interactions with people rather than you can have everything theoretically already written out.
I'll draw slightly on our learnings from our international activity, and again focus on Asia Pacific. And for us, it was quite a different journey, partly because we were working with a public sector, but we started this journey sort of 4 years ago when we went over to Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, and actually introduced ourselves to the market in a sort of fairly soft way. And I think building that kind of rapport and building a reputation through time really helped us land most effectively in that market. The second thing I'd say is those people with the knowledge of the market and with previous experience. Max, who's a person in Singapore and who has a very deep knowledge of Asia Pacific, was sort of been instrumental in building out there and understanding the nuance, particularly where we are as an organization helping UK companies expand out into Asia Pacific. Of course, having that ready-built set of networks is incredibly important to help our product thrive as much as it is to help those companies who are looking to expand thrive when they get there.
One thing I can add that I think is also quite relevant and specific to education is, so as I said, we're based in the UK, and I think this applies to a lot of places in Europe. Education is quite a centrally managed public good. It's, there's a lot of guidelines and maybe regulations centrally about how schools are run, maybe licensing, etc. The US is completely different for us. So the US is run based on districts. There's I think around 16,000 of those, and they each get to decide for themselves how they want to operate, what are their regulation. And so you ultimately get districts that do everything that you might want. And so you basically, as you're doing research and trying to understand localization, you want to stay very broad and then start to focus in on very specific districts and local areas to then start to understand about those areas. Because if you ask a broad question about, so how does the US do teacher licensing? Well, actually, different districts will do everything from no licensing to very strict licensing to anything in between. And so your questions start to become ineffective because your answer is always well, it depends, we do everything here. And so you slowly have to start to hone in and then, find the specific areas where you want to ask questions and understand how those areas are specifically doing things because of just how US education is structured.
I can jump in here and just share a few examples of things that were, for us different. So when I talked about, pricing strategy, some people might think of income levels vary by country. That's what I mentioned. But actually another learning for me was that, in the US, one of our kind of edges was that if you compare on deck to an MBA is far cheaper than that. And so for people in the US, that was a no-brainer because they were comparing it to, what other options they had. But in places like Europe where education is cheap, actually, that is not as competitive pricing. And so I found that people in other markets had varying levels of how much information, concrete information they needed about what do I get out of this in order to make a purchase decision. Where in other places that was a bargain. Here it was more of an investment for whatever reason. And so they had, I needed to develop start hosting Q&A events, start building documentation and doing a lot of things that actually helped us convert candidates better at home too. Another question, Ahmed was referring to this, but there's the accreditation question. In the US, people are more the dropout culture is not obviously universal, but more common than in Europe. So people cared a lot more about accreditation here. We made the decision not to pursue it because, again, too complicated, too expensive. And then other things that we had to adapt to specific markets. This is very specific to founders, but one thing we see is that founders in Europe or in India and other markets, when they start doing a US company raise, they do a flip. When they switch over from being incorporated in the home market to a Delaware company. And so we had to kind of help founders come up with a playbook in order to do that flip. Obviously, it's incredibly complex because you can't do it without giving people legal advice and put yourself in legal risk. But we tried our best to help companies through that journey. And then last thing I'll say is just some nuggets of we do a lot of co-founder matching and co-founder dating support for people who are trying to meet someone to start a company with. And like we had like, I could go another like hour probably on learnings about that, but one thing was like people outside the US were more willing to co-found a company with people in the US than the other way around. Like people in the US mostly wanted other people that were locally based as a co-founder. And so we had that mismatch of like wants and expectations that we had to solve for, again, by creating density in those markets so that people could meet someone locally. So those are like just a few nuggets that came to mind with that question.
I'll add a quick summary. I think, George, you mentioned this early on. Ultimately, I think the best information comes from networks and speaking to people. And so, you might do some initial research in the beginning, but very quickly try to start speaking to people left, right, and center. Talk to anybody who will talk to you. And then always ask in the end, is there anybody else you can connect me to? And you'll be surprised how that kind of snowballs and end up just speaking to a bunch of different people. And that tends to be, I think, the biggest nuggets come from that, just speaking to people.
Yeah, I think leaving all the assumptions behind, right? Have a really open mind and open view on everything that you will face, and also making sure that everything that's already is accomplished with your existing business, that you don't take it for granted that it will come as well in the new markets.
Really good points there, panel. I just to maybe consolidate a couple of the themes I heard. I'd say that whatever your edge is, whether that be pricing or your product strength, I do notice a particular affiliation to being very product-led in the Nordics as well, Anouk. Whatever that strength is, look at that as a potential differentiator from the market that you're entering into, and figure out where that might be a good matching criteria for figuring out where you go in the first place. Ahmed, it's very, very true that the US market is a nation of 50 different states operating very differently. And maybe I'll add on that there's 4 key states that tend to operate very differently from even everybody else. And that's New York, California, Texas, and Florida. Everybody approaches them because they tend to be the largest states in terms of spend. New York, for example, is the largest per student spend in the entire United States at about $25,000 US per student. The average is about 12. But operating in New York and entering the market is very different than working with educators or others in the rest of the country. So it's almost like its own independent country. And then you had to expand to the rest of the US, right? So those are key points that I think everyone raised are very salient. I won't get into the other points because there were so many, and I see some great questions coming into the chat here. So maybe I'll ask a couple of folks to maybe unmute themselves and ask their question of the panel or of a specific person on the panel. Lan, I see you with a question in the chat. Lan Nguyen, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you for the chance for me to ask questions. So as you start it off, what is the indicator that your product will be welcome outside the home market?
Just to qualify that question again there, Lan, your question is about how do you understand what is the indicator that your product would be welcome outside your home market?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
So that's something we worked a lot with. And I would say there's 3 phases to that we went through. Number 1 is just, your research, the interview, and understanding that localization aspect that tells you what are the pain points that people and the customers in that, new country are facing. And then is that what your product has been built to solve? Once you think there is kind of a bit of fit there, the next step you can do is just ask people to do product demos and show them a product and ask them if that would be useful. We spend quite a bit of time just finding principals and school leaders that were willing to give us, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to just have a look at our demos. And yes, there were demos with UK lingo and it's a UK demo, but it was just to get some feedback and some input on whether that's something that they would need or not. And then from there, you keep building to more and more and more until until you kind of get enough of those signals to justify moving. One little tidbit I will give as well is before we went, as we started going to the US, we actually did 0 product work, no product work. And for the first 4 months, we did everything manually behind the scenes on sheets and Trello boards and things like that. And in the US, overselling, showing schools demos and being like, this is gonna come, this is gonna come. And you'd be surprised how far you can get doing that and actually getting really great insights into what the product market fit looks like in the US and what exactly to build, and not just build what you have in the UK or build what you have in your home market, spend all that resource, and then go to the US or wherever else you're going and realize, oh, that's not quite what they want there. And as similar as those markets are, we found there was actually quite substantial differences in the product that they would need, that it turned out to be quite a helpful decision in kind of helping us save money and understand when to build and what to build.
And so in another way, the indicator is not the product, but the issue that you want to resolve. We need to find a way to quantify if that problem is big enough to become a market in outside the home countries. Is that correct?
Yeah, I could say I would agree with that. Your product has to solve a problem, in my opinion, and so you need to make sure that that problem exists where you're trying to go, and that your product is then actually solving that problem in a way that the people, the customers want it to be solved.
And we need to target we need to approach the target customer or target power buyer to validate that problem.
Yeah, but fortunately, I'd say these days, video interviews and video calls are quite easy. So you could do that, in quite low stakes way.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Len.
Sorry, maybe to add to that, I think the power of also doing experiments online, marketing-wise, should also not be underestimated. I think setting the right hypothesis on seeing how to validate if the problem also exists in the new market can be also done easily with really quick experiments. And an example could be that you'll just run content related, or maybe you'll mention that you have content related to the problem, that if that also gets traction, that you also can dive deeper into it and also see if there's a need for that content, which also gives the answers to solve that problem.
If I may cross the line between host and panelists for a second, I'll add that what a lot of the companies that we work with at StartEd tend to see is that when you're expanding into the US or anywhere else, often it's not just about understanding whether it's a new product feature or a problem that one needs to solve. Your product, as it stands right now, the one that has reached product market fit in your home country, may have already solved, may have the features that you require. You just might not be marketing or prioritizing the feature that the local market prefers. So it might be that you have, product feature 1, 2, 3, but the local market that you're expanding into actually values product, solution number 3. So it's really about prioritizing, and so it's more like a marketing problem than a product problem. Just watch out for that, because that can save you a lot of money in the long run and the implementation cost. Hong asks another question. Hong Pham, would you like to approach the stage and ask your question?
Hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can, Huang.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm a startup founder. I like an Edtech startup founder. We built like a marketplace in Vietnam for teachers to open live online class to a group of students. So we built our own web camera technology. And so we have two questions. The first one is like, this morning when I heard from the talks from the festival, there are speakers who mentioned like, okay, Germany really focus on papers, and so we have a request from a customer here in Germany that also suggests us to build a B2B solution for them. Like it is a language school, and they want to deploy the solution for 500 students. But then there is like, okay, shall we focus on this specific language group in Germany only, like spend all of our effort over here in Germany, and then in the end, like we find out that maybe there are just little interest from the German school. So I would like to ask George whether like maybe is there any chance where we can enter to the UK market and maybe to focus on more customers and schools over there in the UK. How do you think about the opportunities for either like our marketplace solution or maybe like for schools in the UK?
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, so I'll first of all couch this in sort of terms that I'm not an expert in terms of understanding the marketplace in your specific area. So I certainly would recommend doing some research, and I can help act, I guess, as a bit of a connector in that sense. So great to connect afterwards. But I would say yes, possibly is the answer. I think there are likely to be many customers looking to get specific functionality built into your product to serve their particular need. I guess what you can do is explore what the different functionality could be amongst a broader range of customers, perhaps including some that might well be in the UK or other markets, and then prioritize on the basis of what you think is most strategically aligned to where you want to go and the markets that you want to try and address. For me, I mean, I don't want to sort of teach you how to suck eggs, so the expression goes, but I'd say just do the research, and I can certainly help with facilitating connections with some of those organizations who may well be your target customers in the UK. So yeah, hopefully that will help.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the audience? Anyone wants to unmute and ask them for the group?
Hey, I have another question. Sorry, this is Lan. My next question is about the landmark in your financial or operations, which signal that it is time to move outside the home market. Do we have any framework or any benchmark for that, please?
Just to qualify that question there, Lan, you're asking how to recognize financial indicators of when it's time to move outside your market?
Yeah, either it is a financial indicator or it is operational indicator. For example, I don't know, it might be number of users, number of subscribers, or the revenue figure.
Right. Maybe I'll add an additional question, because I'm sure the panelists are thinking this as well. Are you relating this to your total addressable market? Help us give us a little bit of context on the total addressable market of your product and where you are in your journey.
I'm early, but the I don't know how to build the ambitions, because I am in UK, but I want to expand the solution to other countries. But if it is only on at the moment, it's on my own, and I don't know if joining this festival is open me to other way of approach, or the involvement of investor, which I always avoid because it's too much to handle on my own. So, but
gotcha. Understood. A very common problem. I think a lot of entrepreneurs at your stage do feel overwhelmed, and certainly I've been there as well, so I empathize, but it does get better. Just about that question though, I think I think the panel might simply say that it's probably best to get the product market fit before choosing to expand. But I think the question you're asking is, how do you recognize that when you might approach that at a future point? Panelists, any advice for Lan?
I think what could be a good indicator is what we always say, your ICP is really important. So what I mean with that is the ideal customer profile. So do you have the ability already to determine what your ideal customer profile is in your current market? So who makes sure which type of customer can you identify in your customer base that is an actual really good fit to the product, that doesn't require too much customization, that also doesn't require too much investment, and also fits also in your processes that you have laid out in terms of the acquisition of customers, and that they also show a lifetime with your product. So the ideal customer profile should be something that you could recognize in your customer base. And then it's about the analytics. So dive into your customer base, see if you can recognize trends there, and see if you can build up such a profile. That could be an indicator of showing that you have a product market fit and that you have found a sweet spot. And whether you want to expand that to new customer groups, or whether you think that you can find that same customer profile in another market, that's then up to you. Into the next question that you should ask yourself: would you rather go for the same type of customers anywhere else, or would you go to a new customer segment that you can tap into with your product?
I wanted to quickly add just a distinction here in terms of like how operations heavy your business is, because there's like a spectrum from like you're like a purely digital player, and of course there's like data regulation and like all this stuff to figure out, customer support that's like respond in a timely manner and all of that, but it's mostly you're like launching in like quote unquote internet nation, which is, you know, you're global from day one. In those cases, like internationalization happens more organically. For example, I'm working with a company that's like a photo editing tool, purely mobile. They've had incredible traction, and Brazil just took on its own. And so they said, we will have to meet the market where it's at. We're seeing this incredible traction there. So we're going to just continue investing in it. We're going to build a local customer support team. We're going to build a business, like a marketing team. And so a lot of the times is, for example, you know, companies like Dropbox, like most of their internalization wasn't about like building a product team locally, but about building a sales team and like an enterprise sales and like a marketing team for consumer stuff, versus like Uber, where it's like, would this actually be a viable product in a new market? Or for example, someone in education, where you have to build like a local curriculum and a local offering, and like you have to basically adapt everything. And in those cases, you know, having a strong product market fit at home doesn't necessarily mean that it will replicate it. Like there's no scientific way to go about it. But you know, as Ahmed was saying earlier, talking to a bunch of people on those markets, seeing, you know, if they're experiencing both at the high level and at the ICP level, as Anouk was saying, to get kind of both sides of the picture, like people who see the big picture and people who actually experience a problem that tell you, yes, if you build this here, we will buy it. I was close, for example, to the Intuit team that was launching in France many years ago. So they launched France with their signature flagship product, which is QuickBooks. It actually took them a really long time to find the right, because like that product is an accounting product for founders and small companies. They had to do so much localization and adapt to the local market and local needs. It was incredibly complex. And the team learned a lot in the process. So again, it depends how expensive or how labor intensive or how operations heavy your model is, and how different that other market is from your home market. So there's, again, no scientific answer, but those are kind of the things I would look at and consider.
Diana, did you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, I have a question for Ahmed. What did you do? So the school leaders giving you 15 minutes of your time in the UK, and what was the ratio of the school leaders you spoke between private schools and public schools?
So in the US, I would say we mostly focused on charter schools, which are a nice hybrid between public and private. For those that don't know, charter schools are publicly funded but like privately run schools that keep getting funding from the government as long as pupils meet performance criteria and keep doing well. And generally, one thing that I think is like a strength in education is people tend to be quite passionate, and really, you know, a big part of why they're in education is to help and try to, you know, make a difference and make things better. And so we felt they're actually generally more open to just having a conversation with other people that are interested in kind of helping with the solution or helping in the space, as opposed to, maybe in accounting or some other industry like that. And you can really use that to your advantage to reach out and speak. Yeah, and now in terms of ratios, you'll spend a lot of time reaching out to people that don't answer you and don't come back to you. That's just part of it. Try your best to leverage your network or any networks that you might have. Friends of friends and third degrees start to get into really, really big groups and large numbers of people. And kind of it's just that getting that first meeting with somebody that's, even if they're just a teacher, they're, within that space, and then asking them for referrals can kind of snowball and get you to start speaking to school leaders. And try to find ways to make it, as efficient or as quick as possible. I think it's not about what's important for you. How do you make it easier for them? How do you make it, less, just less difficult, and it requires less of them so that they can, take that initial yes to help you then and there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice. Thank you.
We probably have time for one more question, and maybe I'll call Sari from KD Science to the stage. Sari.
Thank you. I'm with my mobile phone. I hope you hear me well. So my question is actually because we are now focusing for the US market, but we haven't hired anybody in the US. So have you all kind of done immediate hires or built an office in the US when you went there, or do you feel like you shouldn't hurry that and burn the money for that you can try to enter the market and grow there remotely first?
I can share our experience because we went exactly through that. So, we might be a bit of a unique case, but I was hired into the UK office to do US expansion. And we were able to, kick off on the ground and start and get to a beginning, it's still very, very small in the grand scheme of things. We get to a scale where we're actually having day-to-day work and we're operating, with multiple schools, we're making money. We're revenue generating. And we did all of that with UK-based teams. Again, we ended up being in Minneapolis, so it's like a 6-hour time difference. And so, it's not too bad. You end up working like, 11 a.m. to 11 or 12 p.m. or midnight. And so I think you can do that, depending on the market and what exactly you do in the education space, but I think you can do that. It's worked for us. And I would say, I would rather take the time to find the right hire for the US just because of how important that is than do that a bit quicker, but then, turn out that you didn't hire the perfect fit and you didn't hire the right person to lead the efforts there.
If you don't have any other comments from the panelists, I'll say let's conclude the conversation. I'll add my last 2 cents. As I promised, there's a code in the chat if you'd like to join us at Edtech Week, virtually or in person, that should save you some cash. And I'd love to shake your hand or meet you virtually when you attend. We've been thinking about the event quite a bit over the last year, and that virtual experience is purposefully its own experience. Hopefully as good an experience as we've had just today, this week at Brighteye. I'll also point to what Hej posted in her comment about assessing your readiness for internationalizing. Hej, would you like to discuss that tool before we wrap?
I think the tool kind of is something you look at and go through for yourself. It's one of them, at least it's a diagnostics. It's quite related to Lan's question on like when are you ready, and then deciding on where. So I think people can look at it in their own time.
Well, fantastic. Well, then I appreciate the entire panel, Brighteye for hosting us, George, Ahmed, Anuk, Erica, really thorough, fascinating discussion coming from places of experience. I really appreciated being your host. Thank you for everyone for joining today. And I hope you'll continue to be part of this event with Brighteye. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for organizing as well.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you so much, Ash, for moderating. And thanks, everyone, for joining. The session has been recorded and will be shared. And we hope to also see you at other sessions for the rest of the week. We still got a few to go. So thanks, everyone, and see you soon.